Volume 2 Chapter 2.2. The Fate Flows. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He worked in the office until late. Recently, there was urgent paperwork that needed to be done due to an increase in new clients. He also had a backlog of investment proposals to review. He was planning to finish just a few more things and go home, but he got a visitor this late at night. Who is it at this late hour? Klopp had just finished one document and was placing another stack of papers on the desk. He brushed aside his hair with an irritated voice. He wanted to pretend that he wasn't available, but the visitor should have already noticed the presence of a person through the reflection in the glass window. The knocking sound grew louder. Frustrated, Klopp loosened his tie and unbuttoned his shirt slightly before standing up from his seat. He didn't even bother fixing his folded shirt. He was not dressed appropriately to meet a client, but it wasn't particularly courteous for the visitor to visit the office at this late hour either. In fact, that person should be relieved that they didn't get yelled at and shooed right away. His secretary had already left, so Klopp had to personally open the office door, which had a nameplate with Badnick on it. It wouldn't take him long to open the door, but before it was even halfway open, the visitor banged on it with a force like they were about to break it down. "Are you out of your mind at this hour? Ah, so you're here after all." Standing in the dark corridor and dressed in a dark suit, the visitor surprisingly turned out to be the blonde young count. Startled by his unexpected appearance, Klopp leaned on the door frame with his arms and stared at him blankly. With a slightly stiff and awkward smile, the count asked, "Can you spare me a moment? I may or may not have time." It wasn't meant to be sarcastic, his situation was just exactly like that. If he really insisted on taking up his time, he could spare some, but even if the visitor wasn't Alok, Klopp wanted to ignore it if it was an insignificant issue. However, both Klopp and Alok knew that his intentions didn't come across that way. Alok frowned slightly, seemingly displeased, but soon displayed his characteristic thin smile. "Since I've come all this way at this late night, I would appreciate it if you could spare some time. Didn't you think that it would be rude and that I would have difficulty sparing time for someone who visits without an appointment so late at night?" Even if he said that, Klopp still opened the door and let Alok in. Although they weren't particularly close and didn't have any special relationship, Klopp suspected that there must be an important reason for him to come at this late hour. With a nod, Alok briefly glanced at Klopp as if he had a pressing matter and entered the office. Without words, Alok passed through the secretary's office and crossed the open inner door to enter the actual workspace used by Klopp. Closing the sturdy door and securing the latch, Klopp, with his hands in his trouser pockets, assumed a nonchalant posture and tilted his chin towards the chair, gesturing Alok to take a seat. Glancing at the stiff wooden chair behind him, he seemed to have made up his mind to ignore the courtesy from Klopp and instead wandered around the office. Unlike the small but neatly organized secretary's office outside, the office was quite large, with a large desk, a couple of chairs, and walls filled with bookshelves and filing cabinets, except for the large window behind the desk. Frankly speaking, it wasn't tidy, to say the least. Klopp argued that it was organized according to his rules, but there was no one who really believed him. After all, he rarely had any guests here. Most of the clients were aristocrats, and they preferred to call Klopp to come over to their own lounge or study. As a result, it felt awkward to have an aristocrat standing in this messy space filled with dry paper and the smell of ink, especially when he used exquisite luxury perfumes. "So that's why you always smelled musty." Klopp wanted to tell him to leave if he had any complaints, but it was really late and he didn't have the energy to waste on trivial arguments. So Klopp went to his desk and opened the file he had just been looking at. The count was wandering around the office, taking his time. Having experienced socializing with many aristocratic clients, Klopp somewhat understood the behavior of the city aristocrats who liked to act aloof, so he just let it be. Alok was intentionally taking his time, to avoid the unnecessary rush of getting straight to the point, considering his current unfamiliarity with the space. Usually, when he was with other clients, Klopp would spend time together, engaging in small talk related to light topics. In culinary terms, it would be equivalent to an appetizer. However, since Aylock didn't have an appointment and appeared suddenly at night, Klopp had no intention of serving a full-course meal or showing any courtesy. He would simply do his job, regardless of whether Aylock took his time or not. But he's taking far too much time even considering that. Klopp pushed the document he had just finished reading aside and pulled out another file. He looked up and saw the man still lingering in the office. Aylock, with sparkling eyes like a child who had discovered a treasure ship, was looking around with curiosity. Just like in the study before, Aylock seemed to have an interest in books as he carefully examined the worn book spines of dusty law books Klopp had used since his university days, tracing them one by one with his finger. He was even engrossed in observing the dust rolling around in the corners. If Klopp left him on his own, they would be spending the whole night in the office. "What brings you here?" At the blunt question, Aylock looked up, slightly surprised, as if he'd just realized that Klopp was present in this office. Then he turned to face him, approaching with a faint smile. Although there was a client chair right in front of him, he didn't sit down and instead looked down at Klopp, who was sitting on the other chair. Klopp still disliked the guy. Aylock revealed the purpose of his visit without hesitation. "I made an investment recently and incurred losses. It wasn't a significant loss, but because everyone kept telling me to meet you, I reluctantly came here. To think that you could lose enough money to buy 10 ordinary houses in the Eastern Gem Mine and still call it not a significant loss. Truly, T-Wind is remarkable. Did you already know?" The Count's smile became a little awkward. Leaning his upper body back and resting it against the backrest, Klopp spoke. "News spreads quickly in this industry. Then our talk would be fast too. Regarding the investment agent. I'm not taking any more clients. I'm already overwhelmed with my current clients, and I don't want to deal with annoying clients who easily fall for shoddy investment schemes that are nothing more than scams." Klopp rested his chin on his hand while leaning his elbow on the armrest and smirked. Aylock's pride seemed to be wounded by that and he tightly pursed his lips. He then pulled out a neatly folded letter from inside his well-tailored jacket, which accentuated his physique. "What's this?" "A recommendation letter." Klopp received it and opened it. The content wasn't long. "It's me. No need for small talk, make a contract with him. This is all for your good. Derbyshire. That damned old man." Klopp gritted his teeth. As he exerted a little force with his fingertips, the high-quality handmade paper got creased. Seeing him, Aylock grimaced a little, as if in disapproval, but then smiled again. "I have no intention to make a contract with a barbarian like you. However, it would be impolite to reject a recommendation from Viscount Derbyshire." Watching those dizzyingly seductive lips that formed a soft arc, Klopp muttered curses inwardly. He was really busy, but since it was a request from someone he was indebted to, he couldn't refuse. If Viscount Derbyshire hadn't written him an introduction letter to the jeweler, he would have refused Aylock. If it weren't for Viscount Derbyshire's recommendation, would never have gotten involved with you. I'm already busy enough, and yet you, an ignorant person who came here late at night rudely and can't even recognize a scammer, treat me, someone who can save you, like a barbarian, and try to provoke me. I'm forced to enter into a contract with someone who always does pathetic things. It's an act of suicide that I would never ever take. But I'm only accepting it at the request of Viscount Derbyshire. It would be best to for you express your deepest gratitude to him." Klopp said that with all his might. Hearing that, Aylock's lips dropped, as if his pride was wounded. "I understand." Klopp had thought that if Aylock had complained back, he could use that as an excuse to Viscount Derbyshire for not signing the contract. But he was surprised himself that Aylock agreed easily. Outwardly, Aylock was acting cool, but Klopp couldn't help but suspect that the proud Count, who came to find him secretly at this hour, had something other than the gem mine to deal with. He might be in quite the predicament. As Klopp pondered various thoughts and glanced up and down at him, Elok glared at him with a displeased expression, before smiling again. That damned smile of his. Since it's already late, let's talk about it again next time. For now, I need to find out about your financial situation first. When should I come again? I'll come to your place. Probably in a couple of days. I'll be waiting. Well then, I shall take my leave. I apologize for coming so late. He must be satisfied with the outcome. Elok left the office with a casual farewell. As Klopp watched the carriage leaving in the distance, he caught a faint trace of the refreshing scent that Elok had left behind. And he let out a sigh. Looking down, he noticed that his thing had become hard some time ago. It must be because he had been sitting for a long time. Sitting back down in his chair, he gripped the pen and was about to look at the documents when he suddenly stood up, opened the window, and let in some fresh air. Like hell it was because I had been sitting for a long time. Damn it. He realized that his desire hadn't disappeared. And of all people, why towards an alpha? If he were an omega, he could drug him and make him his. Of course, if he actually did it, he would ruin his life, but he couldn't understand why he was interested in an alpha like this. Was it just simply because of his sexual frustration? It seemed like it was really time for him to get married and settle down. Klopp took out the engagement ring he had stored in the drawer. Seeing the sapphire gleaming blue in the lamplight made him feel slightly better. He neatly put the ring back in the drawer and started looking at the documents he hadn't been able to handle due to the sudden uninvited visitor. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 3.1. Can't escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Volume 2 Chapter 3.1. Can't escape, but still, he was our mother. Even if he may have been an enemy to you, father, he was the only mother I had. With blue eyes resembling the man's, he glared at him with anger and resentment. The man couldn't understand why his beloved son was furious with him. He had only tried his best for their mother's sake. I loved your mother. I couldn't forgive the person who made him die so tragically. Our mother. Mother was the person who died at father's hands. Please stop your lies full of deceit. Your mother is not that person, but Raphael Westport. You were named after him because you resemble him. I don't need that name. I'm no longer Raphael. You should have named me. If you wanted to name me after mother. The old man raised his fist in anger, while his grown son stared back at him without backing down. The raised hand couldn't come down. Tears streamed down the eyes of his resentful son. I will never return to this estate again. What do you mean by that? I can't live in the place where my mother died so tragically. With those words, his son left. The man immediately chased after his back. Raphael. Before opening the front door, the son stood in the middle of the stairs and looked at his father. In between them, an old housekeeper stood with a pale face, constantly shedding tears and pleading, "Young master, please." His son gave her a cold glare and then turned back to face the man. Goodbye, Viscount Klopp Bandyke. Raphael. The son left. And he never ever returned again. The man who lost his eldest son ran toward that person's tombstone and cursed him. Even after he died, he was still tormenting him to tears. Soon, he came carrying a hammer to smash that tombstone. His second son rushed in to stop his madness and was hit by the swinging hammer, causing a severe injury. That was the man's second madness. Why is Raphael my son? And what's with me going mad and smashing the tombstone? What absurd dream! Because of the wild dream, he woke up with annoyance surging through him. He got out of bed, massaged his dizzy head, and rubbed his eyes with his palm. Barefoot, he went down from his bed and headed to the nearest large window to draw back the heavy curtains. What incredibly amazing weather! Just perfect. The gloomy sky seemed as if it could bring a gust of wind accompanied by hail at any moment, letting out a distant roar. Perhaps it was a sign of something. His dream was bad too. It's all because of that damn Count. Today was the day he would be visiting the Count's estate. Could there be a more fitting beginning than this? Klopp dismissed the lingering dream with irritation and swiftly discarded the pajamas he was wearing. After a reluctant and meager breakfast, amidst the murmurs of the dream that still lingered, he barely caught the waiting carriage with his footsteps before a hailstorm poured down. The road quickly turned into a sheet of ice. While worrying needlessly about the carriage wheels on the road, the hail transformed into a hazy drizzle, making the mood gloomy. Just my luck. Sighing, he looked outside the carriage window and saw the magnificent estate under the grey sky. A butler, dignified and pretentious like his master, welcomed him. Having seen Klopp before, the butler greeted him with, "Welcome, Sir Bandyke." However, the butler's demeanor, to put it nicely, was impeccably polite, but to put it honestly, he had a kind of cold aura that was impossible to describe. "It's not like I came to this shitty house because I want to, butler." Without saying a word, Klopp handed over his slightly dampened coat to the faultless butler. He took it with his fingertips as if it were a dirty rag and handed it to the footman standing next to him without a word. The butler turned around without saying anything and led the way. He walked with his shoulders proudly squared, his head held high as if he had a steel brace around his neck. Is he the master or the servant? Perhaps there was some special drug mixed into the air of this estate that stiffened one's joints. It was hard to imagine that someone actually lived in this house, given the unusually long hallway they passed through. Guided by the butler, they arrived at the study that he had come before. Upon entering the open door, the Count, who was sitting on the sofa while sipping on tea, looked up and smiled. "You came earlier than I expected. After sending that carriage, you still say earlier than expected. Even before exchanging greetings, Klopp already showed signs of displeasure, so Aylock didn't retort back, simply smiling and gesturing for him to take a seat. Tea. While Klopp was taking his seat, without instructing the butler, Aylock poured black tea into an extra cup from the prepared tea set and added a spoonful of sugar with a silver spoon. At first, Klopp thought that, just like himself, Aylock had a somewhat rare preference to add only sugar instead of cream, but the teacup was pushed to him. Then he noticed that there was already a cup of tea with cream in front of the Count. "How did you know?" "What do you mean?" "My tea preference. I think this is not something common in the city. I think I remember seeing you drink it before. Just as you said, it wasn't a common preference, so I remembered. Was it during a tea party before?" As aristocrats were limitlessly mindful of others, they even loved remembering useless details. The Count, who could be considered at the pinnacle of aristocracy, seemed to be the same. The deep-flavored tea had a slightly bitter aftertaste, awakening his still somewhat sluggish mind. It suited his taste perfectly. "How is the tea?" "Not bad." The Count smiled satisfactorily as he sipped on his smooth, milky tea. The tea was more akin to a golden hue than black tea, and it made one wonder if his skin was so pale because of drinking such tea. Hair as blonde as milk tea, and skin as smooth as milk. Lips with a subtle red hue, like the rose pattern engraved on the teacup. And rather than a deep scent, the Count always wore a refreshing scent of high-quality perfume. Judging by his appearance and demeanor, he looked as if he preferred to be enveloped in an expensive fragrance, but he wore perfume like a weak flirtatious alpha. Alpha perfume was something you use when you want to cover up the scent of an omega you'd slept with the night before. While someone was having nightmares, it seems that someone else had spent a truly fantastic night. Annoyance surged through him once again. As the cup clinked, his lush eyelashes, which were elegantly facing downwards, soon rose upwards, and his blue eyes stared in this direction. And again, he smiled. Just why on earth does he keep smiling like that? Klopp placed the half-finished tea on the table and spoke in a slightly stiff voice. "Ledgers. Investment contracts. Real estate-related documents. All supporting documents regarding liquid assets. What? Bring them immediately. We have work to do. Already. We haven't even finished our tea. Alok, slightly taken aback, set the teacup down. Klopp had already stood up, and was approaching the desk where the documents were. He pulled out the chair, took off his jacket, and hung it over the back of the chair. I didn't come here just to leisurely drink tea. I'm busy. I had to carve out time for this. Are you not going to spare the whole day for this? Viscount Derbyshire told me that you would have a full day of conversation with the other contractors. I have an appointment in the afternoon. Don't forget that you came to find me unexpectedly. When Klopp drew a firm line, Alok silently accepted it. Then he stood up and gracefully shook the bell that was placed nearby. The butler appeared right away into the study, carrying even more than the anticipated towering stacks of documents. It vividly showed the ancient lineage and immense wealth of the aristocratic family, along with their reckless management. Klopp was astounded as he looked at the disorganized pile of documents. Damn it! If it was this much, you should have organized this beforehand. I've heard that it's better to show it as it is, without any tampering. That's referring to organized ledgers. Where are the receipts for this? Putting on a stern expression, the confused Count's words made him feel absurd. Do I have to gather receipts too? Klopp looked at him in silence, and the Count glanced elsewhere for a moment before their gazes met again, and he smiled. Yes, go ahead and smile. At least if you smile, I won't swear at you. No, I might even want to swear at you more. I don't know anymore. Klopp looked at the dusty ledgers, let out a deep sigh, and unbuttoned his sleeves, rolling up his shirt. I guess it would be hard for me to meet Raphael today. Ah. He looked through the pile of documents, picked up what appeared to be a book, and said it to himself, but the Count suddenly looked at this side with a nervous and serious face. I apologize. I really failed to consider your circumstances at all. You can come next time. Or perhaps I'll organize these documents myself first and send them to you. Never mind it. I'm already here. Besides, I don't think you've ever done it before. If you mess with it now, it'll only be more of a hindrance. I'm truly sorry. To have interrupted your time with your loved one. The Count's words seemed a bit strange. Klopp frowned and stared at Alok intently. He must really be sorry. Even in his smile, Alok had a slightly pained expression with his face down. If you have time to worry about other people's personal life, why don't you lift that file rack over there onto the desk? Ah. Alok quickly grabbed the documents Klopp was pointing at and lifted them up. Meanwhile, Klopp sat on the luxurious leather chair with a scowl on his face. He was slightly surprised at how perfectly comfortable it fit him, as if he had been using it for 20 years. However, he showed no expression and opened the ledger, tightening the muscles on his face. As expected, it was taking him a very long time. The third cup of cold tea had already gone cold. Alok, who had been sitting on the sofa, kept flipping through the books gathered around, observing Klopp. Suddenly, he got up from his seat and headed outside. Did he get bored of waiting and leave to do something else? I'm still left with his work. Klopp had been thinking that he couldn't concentrate well because Alok was in his mind. It was probably a good thing that he left since he was in the way. However, after a while, the study door opened again, and Alok came in carrying something on a tray. He continued reviewing the ledger and making notes, but when he took a short glance, he saw that Alok had brought a small silver tray with snacks. It seemed like he brought snacks, including sandwiches and cookies. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 3.2. Can't escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Volume 2 Chapter 3.2. Can't escape. Since you're here, I wanted to offer you a meal. I'll decline. I thought you might, so I prepared some snacks. Just leave them there. Without even looking, Klopp gestured with his hand towards above the file rack. After placing the tray down, Alok needlessly walked around. The scent of the perfume was quite unpleasant. Klopp frowned, glancing at the person, who was pacing beside him with hands on the back. "Ah, I apologize if I'm disturbing you. Just sit over there. You can either read a book or leave." "I shall do that then." In response to Alok's obedient reply, Klopp couldn't hide his curiosity and glanced at the person's back as he walked towards the seat. Did that Count eat something wrong? Why was he suddenly being so obedient to his words? It couldn't be that he wants to act nice towards me, right? Is he in pain somewhere? Then Klopp noticed the tray. There was a very appetizing-looking ham sandwich with black dried fruits placed on them. It must be because he's hungry. After all, aristocrats wouldn't eat alone in front of others. If you're hungry, go ahead and eat first. Don't mind me. No, it's all right. Those are for you. I don't eat anything with raisins. To be so picky about food at your age. That wouldn't happen in our house. When Klopp playfully teased him like a child, the Count suddenly shot him a sharp look, and as their eyes met, he quickly turned away with an unpleasant expression. Then, with a pretentious smile, he retorted, "Do you have time to worry about other people's private life? Besides, I'm not someone from your household." Right, that's how the Count would respond. "I really appreciate your concern. If you keep your mouth shut so as not to disturb me, I'll finish the work faster." In response to Klopp's audacious smile, the Count shot another glance at me. They both glared at each other for a moment before turning away. In the study, there were only the sounds of a pen nervously scratching and the fierce flipping of books. This is a mess. By late afternoon, Klopp was finally able to organize the main ledgers and big investment in order. The conclusion drawn by Klopp from a professional standpoint was just that one sentence. A perplexed Alok, who was sipping his tea, asked with a puzzled look, "How bad is it? If you continue with this kind of mismanagement, you'll face a financial crisis within a few years. Assuming you don't end up drowning in debt. Is it that serious?" Seeing his slightly annoyed expression and stiffened complexion, it was evident that he was indeed an aristocrat. Not just Alok, most of the customers who had suffered significant losses due to investment failures reacted in a similar manner. Some weak Omega aristocrats even burst into tears. For aristocrats, getting employed somewhere to earn money was akin to selling their bodies from a commoner's perspective. It was such a shocking revelation. Every time he saw that expression, Klopp felt offended, as they might look at him like he was a high-class butler or a host to them. Even though they maintained an indifferent and composed demeanor. Among the countless reactions Klopp had encountered so far, Alok's response was relatively calm and limited. He smiled with a slightly concerned expression. Even in this kind of situation, he's still smiling. Should I be more forceful? Since you have a lot of assets, you won't go bankrupt immediately. However, if you continue to fail in your investments and insist on maintaining such extravagant spending, like tea parties, you will completely ruin yourself if someone deliberately tries to take advantage of you. Wrinkles formed on the Count's twitching brow, and the corners of his upturned lips subtly drooped. If this kind of reckless and haphazard investment continues, it wouldn't take a large organization. If just a few intelligent individual investors get together and try to scam you, T-Wind could be left as a mere relic in the history books. Suddenly, the Count stared directly at me. And in a slightly angry tone, he asked. "Like you, for example." Klopp snorted. He then pulled out something he'd been meaning to ask from the file cabinet he had been sorting. "Of course. I'm currently the best in this industry. What on earth is this National Hunger Association? And you built a house for angels who lost their mothers. You've been making huge donations on a regular basis. Of course, it's clearly charity. As an aristocrat, it's my moral obligation to help those in need by giving what we naturally possess. Of course, donating to charity is something the upper class should and can do as a form of social contribution. But these two organizations, they don't have valid addresses or proper administrators. The donation receipts they provided are poorly written, and full of spelling and grammatical errors. Most importantly, I've never heard of these organizations. And I'm familiar with all municipal, royal, or internationally recognized ones. Where did you find out about them? At a charity party. When Klopp pressed him with an intense gaze, the Count avoided the gaze he had just been shooting from earlier and replied. Klopp raised his eyebrows while waving the shoddy receipts written by scammers. Stop lying and tell me the truth. Where? On the streets. What the hell? How can someone trust a complete stranger they meet on the streets and hand over a large sum of money? If he's treating his money like that, it would be better to give it to the poor top-ranking graduate. So he could move out already. Klopp was silent for a moment, at a loss for words, before he spoke again. Transferring funds to these two organizations is prohibited from now on. It's obvious that they are scammers. You're a scammer yourself. What did you say just now? I didn't say anything. I heard everything. Who was a scammer? Let's move on for now, I need to scold him a bit more. Glancing at him briefly, who was still unaware of his true situation, Klopp pulled out the next argument. Who authorized such a foolish investment? A gem mine. Most people already know that the veins there have dried up for a long time. You have so many tea parties and social gatherings, but did you not have a single contact who could provide accurate information? At that, the Count stared at Klopp intently, then smiled a little strangely. Now I know. That it was a scam. It's just that, my father's long-time friend recommended that I invest in it. I was just trusting him. Maybe he wasn't really a friend. The Count's blue eyes seemed slightly shaken by the blunt retort. But soon, the movement ceased, making Klopp wonder if it was just his imagination. As Klopp continued to point out each mistake, the Count, perhaps hurt in his pride, furrowed his brows and crossed his arms. For an aristocrat to fold his arms to the point of wrinkling his clothes, he must feel very uneasy. Instead of calling it anger, it was more appropriate to describe him as sulking. Klopp had to suppress a chuckle that almost burst out at the sight. After spending a long time there, Klopp realized that he should never entrust Alok T. Wind with a checkbook. Originally, he had planned to put up a pretense since he was asked by Viscount Derbyshire, who he couldn't refuse because he was very indebted to him. He was going to avoid a contract if he could. He had come with the intention of introducing him to another wealth manager or investment agent, but now, looking at this aristocrat who seemed to have no concept of asset management and didn't even seem to know the value of the currency, Klopp had to hold back his laughter. He was a classic example of someone who forgot how to walk while living above the clouds and was now glaring at him with a face full of dissatisfaction. If anyone should be angry, it should be Klopp, who realized the troubles of the person he didn't want to get involved with. So, after this, what are you planning to do about it? That's the question I should be asking you, Count T. Wind. You're my investment agent, so you should explain it to me. Klopp was taken aback. Who said I was your investment agent? I've never signed any contract. That, well, under Klopp's cold criticism, Alok acted as if he had been betrayed. His expression clearly showed that he couldn't believe it. His trembling lips parted, and he fidgeted with his fingers. The blonde Count, who was too dignified to even point fingers, eventually bit his lip tightly. It was a contract that didn't need to be done, but in fact, it was a contract that didn't need to be rejected either. It was true that Klopp was somewhat pressed for time, but considering Tywin's reputation and vast wealth, if it had been someone else, he might not have been able to refuse the contract. The words of the persuasive Viscount Derbyshire were not entirely wrong, this could really be a good help to Klopp. But personally, Klopp found the Count uncomfortable, so he tried to avoid him. However, seeing Alok whimpering like a drenched puppy, not able to say a single unpleasant word. It bothered Klopp even more. Eventually, Klopp let out a heavy sigh. "Let's draw up a contract, and then we can discuss our plans afterward. That means, listen to my conditions first. Of course, I have no intention of conceding, and if any of them are not honored, there will be no contract." At those words, the Count stood up from his seat with his best attempt at making a poker face. Then he examined the documents on the desk where Klopp was sitting. Aylock looked down at Klopp with a smile, like he wasn't being gloomy just now. "Where do I sign? Have you been listening to anything I said so far?" Once the contract was decided, all the remaining documents had to be thoroughly reviewed. It would be one thing if he had a good wealth manager, but his current one wasn't good enough, so he'd be fired immediately and the position would be vacant. Other than tied-up assets like real estate and long-term investments, Klopp decided to invest a significant portion of his other liquid and cash assets in a trust fund. In other words, he took control of the Count's finances. Typically, aristocrats wouldn't trust people to such an extent. Even if they followed the advice of a financial advisor like Viscount Derbyshire, they usually managed their own assets. However, Aylock T. Wind showed absolutely no interest in wealth. During the few days of reviewing his documents, Klopp could vaguely guess the reason behind it. Aylock seemed to believe that openly discussing money and expressing significant interest in it was an uncultured act. Klopp couldn't believe that a person with such cultured manners existed. Even the royal family wouldn't be like him. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 3.3. Can't escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Volume 2 Chapter 3.3. Can't escape. It was no wonder that the Count was so eager to sign the thick contract that Klopp had presented to him after only a few days of absence. Klopp quickly grasped the hand holding the luxurious handmade fountain pen. The Count looked at Klopp in surprise. "How the hell are you so sure of me that you would blindly sign without even reading it? I'm sure you wrote it well. After all, you've boasted several times that you're the best in the industry." "That's just my words. But you should verify it yourself. Read it." "All right then, so let go of my hand. It hurts." Apparently, he was so agitated that he had put too much strength into his grip. The Count's hand was slightly smaller and a lot smoother than Klopp's hand. When he released it, the Count murmured in a low voice, "Your brute force is unnecessarily strong." Klopp glared at him until his eyes hurt, but the Count bowed his head and didn't see it as he was busy examining the contract. The delicate papers were quickly turned over. Is he really reading it properly? Read it aloud. So I can confirm that you really read it all. I'm past the age of having a tutor. So prove to me that you're really reading it. Klopp was close to shouting at him, so Aylock began reading the contract out loud with annoyance. He wasn't reading in a loud voice, but in the study where there were only the two of them, it was clear and sound. Maybe it was because he had sung cultured songs before. Aylock elegantly recited the contract, filled with rigid vocabulary, as if it were a romantic poem. While reciting the lengthy content, Klopp unknowingly got absorbed in it, as if he were listening to a beautiful aria. Even though he had written it himself, he couldn't grasp the content at all. His cup of tea was untouched, and he gazed intently at the Count, who had his beautiful golden eyelashes slightly lowered as he continued reading the contract. "Is this fee sufficient? I think it's lower than the previous agent." "Oh, damn it." In the midst of experiencing a rare personal moment of being immersed in the world of artistic sensibility, with those words, Klopp was forcefully pulled back into reality, almost swearing. Half of it was directed at that pathetic Count and the other half at the previous agent who had been dismissed by the Count. As repeatedly mentioned, Klopp, who was recognized as the best in the industry, naturally demanded a fee that matched his reputation, which was 3 times higher than usual for this contract that required him to handle various troublesome tasks. And yet, it was lower than that of his previous agent. That cunning little swindler. What was his name again? I think I wrote it down somewhere. If I see him again, I'll get rid of him and make sure he never scams anyone again. Klopp imagined how he would deal with that rotten scoundrel. While he was having wicked thoughts, Aylock, with a faint smile that involuntarily appeared on his face, signed with his graceful handwriting. Before he closed his fountain pen, Klopp handed him another copy and pointed to the places where he needed to sign again. There are 2 copies, so sign both. Contracts can be quite bothersome. Complaining about how bothersome it was to sign just 3 times, the Count completed his signature and without even considering taking the copy of the documents, he abruptly got up and made an excuse about having urgent matters to attend before leaving. Not having enough energy to be surprised or angry anymore, Klopp personally took the copy and put it in the desk drawer in Aylock's study. He put the key on a silver tray carried by the waiting butler. "Where is Aylock?" "Count T. Wind is at the music hall." "Shall I guide you there?" Klopp looked at the butler, who put an exaggerated staccato intonation when mentioning Count T. Wind. "Never mind. That damned aristocrat with his leisure time." He had a strong premonition that this would become very troublesome in the future. In just a short time, the intuitive expertise he had as an investor had not proven to be off the mark. A week hadn't even passed, and Klopp was already cursing himself for entering into this day's contract. What Klopp asked of Aylock was not a difficult task. It was something that even a young child could do. It was simply a matter of consulting him whenever he wanted to spend exceeding a certain amount. He thought he had given generous guidelines. Yet, he was bothered by numerous calls from the office throughout the day. The Count wanted to inquire if he could purchase a series of paintings by a talented young artist. The Count expressed his desire to make a donation at this charity party. The amount is approximately this much. The Count wants to know if he can purchase a rare first edition that will be auctioned. He also asked if you could attend the auction instead. The Count wishes to participate in this pottery exhibition. The Count wants to celebrate the Duke's birthday. The Count, just a week had passed, and the Count's footman had visited his office for the 53rd time. He was still processing the receipt for the substantial amount of money Aylock had used in his previous visit. Now, even just hearing those footsteps alone, it made Klopp's temples throb. The moment that person entered, Klopp almost snapped his pen holder in half. What is it this time? What is the Count up to now? Please read this. The well-mannered footman handed Klopp a high-quality handmade envelope and performed a bow before quickly leaving. Klopp couldn't even react. Until now, there had been brief notes and messages, but it was the first time he received an official letter. The envelope, made of luxurious paper, had a handwriting as distinctive as the owner's face, and it read. He wondered if there was something important written inside. As he nervously opened the letter, his pen holder almost slipped from his hand. Dear Sir Bandyke, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for your tireless efforts in serving this Count, especially during this vibrant season of lush greenery. While I, who am enjoying comfort thanks to your sacrifices, feel profound sadness for not even being able to offer you a fragrant cup of tea. Yet, in seeking support from your esteemed presence, how can I raise my head? However, I hope you understand my position, as I cannot disregard the enduring tradition of our esteemed Count's lineage. With the approaching early summer, in the rose garden which the Count is proud of, I'm organizing a soiree. This soiree presents a precious opportunity to carry on the artistic heritage inscribed in our aristocratic lineage and provide beautiful memories to countless individuals. Therefore, I firmly believe that you will consent. I commend your passion, which knows no bounds even on busy holidays. May you always be filled with harmony. Count T. Wind. Aylock putting aside the sentences that seemed to be written intentionally to provoke anger, the words that caught his attention in his burning, intense gaze were undoubtedly countless individuals. What exactly does the Count mean by countless individuals, according to his standards? He can't be planning to build opera seats in his house. Klopp's hands trembled with cold suspicion. Just then, a folded page slipped and fell beneath. It listed Aylock's rough estimate of the expenses of the event. Glancing at it quickly, Klopp wordlessly stood up and put on his coat. Crumpling the letter and stuffing it into his pocket, he left the office with a look that left the secretary speechless. Inside the carriage racing toward the Count's estate, Klopp took out the crumpled paper once again. The immense cost was such that one might think the Count had invited a royal orchestra and a world-renowned maestro to play at once. Currently, the Count had declared austerity measures and strictly prohibited any overspending until his investment returns entered a stable phase. He had definitely reminded him of that several times. However, this wasn't just excessive spending, it was lunatic consumption. Klopp urged the rushing carriage to go even faster, even if the wheels were already about to come off. He pressed for more speed than usual. As the carriage arrived at the Count's driveway sooner than expected, Klopp leaped out as soon as it entered the drive. And upon seeing the butler rushing out in response to the sound of the carriage, Klopp immediately shouted. "Where is he? What is the matter, sir?" The butler raised his one-eyes glasses and asked in a stern tone. After a pause, Klopp dangled a piece of paper with the estimated expenses in front of him. "So it's related to the expenses for the soirée." It's relatively more modest than usual." "Were these expenses reduced?" "That's impressive. Anyway, it exceeds the amount that I laid out by more than 5 times. I need to meet the Count immediately. Otherwise, your salary will be reduced starting from next month." "My salary is determined by the Count, hence it doesn't concern Sir Bandyke. However, allow me to guide you. The Count has given those instructions." Facing a rampageous Alpha who seemed about to explode at any moment, the butler calmly presented his composed response without batting an eye. He turned his head and led the guest with an upright posture. Klopp felt suspicious of the place that they were heading as it was in a different direction from the study or the meeting room. "Where are we going?" "To the music hall. The maestro and renowned musicians are selecting the repertoire for the soirée. With all due respect, please be mindful that the maestro and renowned musicians are there." Klopp understood the meaning the butler emphasized, but he merely furrowed his brow at the mention of the maestro. As they approached the doors, loud dissonant sounds resonated from the Count Estate's music hall, which was the size of a small theater, as if many people were playing instruments and trying to synchronize their performances. Without paying attention, one wouldn't even be able to tell if there were people entering or leaving the place. The butler only guided Klopp to the music hall, he didn't announce Klopp's presence to the people in the room. It seemed like retaliation for disregarding his previous question. That rude oldie. No one paid attention to Klopp in the music hall full of musicians and instruments. No, to put it more precisely, there were 2 clarinet players, who looked like omegas, glimpsed this way but soon ignored him. It seemed because there was no instrument in his hand. Amidst the chaotic music hall adorned with murals from indeterminable time periods, Aylock stood in the center. Unaware of Klopp's presence, he was in conversation with a middle-aged Alpha holding a violin. Usually, when Klopp saw him, he would only put on a smile full of pretense, but now, Aylock was laughing so brightly and making sounds as if he was truly enjoying his time with the other person. The view made Klopp's insides churn. A person couldn't even meet his lover on holidays and came here running while at work. Aylock, you're truly a genius. This musical soirée will be incredibly beautiful. It's all thanks to the maestro's participation. You've invited me, so of course I should participate. The Alpha even lightly tapped Aylock's shoulder with his hand. Aylock, who usually would meticulously brush away even a fallen leaf from the sky. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 3.4. Can't escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Volume 2 Chapter 3.4. Can't escape. Klopp grumbled inwardly, but strangely, he couldn't approach Aylock. The Count, who was smiling so brightly, felt unfamiliar. And, at the same, Klopp felt that he shouldn't get close to him. As someone who only knew that symphony meant simultaneous playing of instruments, he would undoubtedly be on their way. He hesitated for a moment and decided to wait outside the music hall. However, the clarinet player who had noticed him earlier unnecessarily butted in. "Who are you?" The Omega's voice was loud enough for Alok, who had been chatting over there, to turn around. Since the attention of the music hall suddenly shifted in this direction, Klopp had no choice but to turn around and give his greeting with his eyes. The laughter disappeared from the Count's face, which had just been laughing moments ago, and a polite yet fake smile appeared. It didn't feel good to be treated like an unwelcome guest when he didn't particularly want to disturb them. On top of that, he was already irritated by the expense issue, so his expression became even more rigid. The middle-aged Alpha, who was also looking at this side, took a step back, startled. With a faint smile, Alok excused himself to the other person and walked over this way. Perhaps he was a little annoyed by the interruption, as his smile seemed deeper than usual. The gazes of the people inside the quiet music hall moved lightly, like clouds, following the blonde Alpha. When Klopp noticed that many people were looking in this direction, his skin felt tingling for no reason. However, Alok, who stood at the center of the hall, seemed completely unfazed. Since they couldn't argue here, Klopp left the music hall without saying a word, and Alok followed behind him. As soon as they reached a small terrace not far from the music hall, the Count's stern voice came from behind. "Did you see what I sent you?" "I am here because I saw that." A snarky response came out of his mouth, a little too much even to himself. When Klopp turned around, the blue eyes, which had gotten deeper, stared at him. It was a gaze that always felt piercing, but today it was particularly more intense. His summer-sky eyes shimmered as if they were soaked in water. With the breeze, Klopp could smell a stronger perfume than usual. His already unpleasant mood plummeted in an instant. It wouldn't be strange for Alok to have a lover, but that fact kept bothering Klopp. The image of the Omega woman in the green dress from the previous time came to his mind, and his grip tightened for no reason. Trying to hide it, he clenched his hand behind his back and glared down at Alok. "Do you remember what it says at the end of the contract? Any breach of the above will result in immediate termination of the contract." It wasn't a genuine question about whether he remembered or not, he was just testing his luck. But the immediate answer left him speechless for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I'm surprised you remember that. Most people would memorize such a short document like that after reading it once. I hope you don't treat people as fools just because you were a top graduate at the Capital University." "A short document," he said. It was an absurd statement to claim that he had memorized the 7 densely packed pages of the contract, printed in standard font on standard paper, after reading it just once. "What's the first sentence of page 2? Investment agent's duties. Clause 1, the contractors." "Wait. Are you testing me right now?" "Exactly." Watching the Count make a rare show of displeasure, Klopp nodded his head like a private tutor inspecting homework. In honesty, he couldn't precisely remember what the first sentence of the second page was. However, the other party wouldn't know that fact. Klopp was actually quite surprised to see Alok so angry at him for doubting himself. He can't be a genius. He seemed like he was just watching the texts in the book before. There was no way he could read that fast. Even when he was in doubt, Klopp belatedly realized that Alok had indeed read the book back then. He hadn't been pretending to be knowledgeable because he was self-conscious of Klopp, but he read fast because he was really smart. Just what on earth is this man? By now, since he had already invited the maestro and the musicians, canceling the soirée now wouldn't prevent financial losses. He was usually a laid-back guy, but when situations like this arose, he was a quick thinker. "You do realize you exceeded the amount that I laid out, right? I contacted you. I politely sent a formal letter. I told you to discuss with me, not notify me." The frustration that had been bubbling up earlier had finally boiled over. It was irritating to act this way all week, and on top of that, he didn't like how Alok would throw bombs like this and not even care when he came all the way here. Klopp really hated how he was delightfully interacting with another alpha male. And if he was so intelligent, why hadn't he realized that the letter would make him jump up and down with rage? Growling, he approached closer, and Alok took 2 steps back in panic. Alok ended up trapped between the closed glass door of the terrace and Klopp. As Klopp got closer, he could smell something slightly sweet within the refreshing perfume scent. "Alright, I understand, so back off a bit." Alok put on his trademark thin smile and tried to move to the side, and seeing that, without realizing it, Klopp grabbed his arm. His blue eyes widened unlike ever before. Confusion, embarrassment, and fear seeped into them. The corners of Alok's lips, forced into a smile, trembled slightly. At that moment, Klopp felt a sting in his chest. He was well aware that he could be quite intimidating when he was angry. However, he hadn't thought that this domineering count would be afraid of him. The arm held in his hand was trembling ever so slightly. "Let go." "Oh, I'm sorry." Hearing the trembling voice, Klopp snapped out of his daze and released his grip, stepping back. "I'll make sure to discuss in advance next time," Alok said softly as he enveloped the arm that was held by Klopp, then took a few steps to the side. Klopp could see Alok's intention to avoid him. Somehow, it made his heart sink even more. Klopp didn't like the way Alok was acting like he'd been assaulted when all he'd done was grab his arm. However, the other party seemed too serious to bring it up here and retort back. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave for today. I'm not feeling well." "I understand." Alok didn't seem to have any signs of illness, but he looked a little pale and was avoiding him, so Klopp reluctantly agreed. As he tried to open the glass door to the terrace and go inside, Alok softly muttered, as if wanting him to hear it, "You're an ignorant fool with no musical taste. You just use violence." Klopp felt unjust after hearing such words and was about to say something back, but Alok slipped through the door before he could stop him. He walked hastily, resembling a herbivorous animal desperately fleeing from a predator. Seeing that, Klopp couldn't grab him. After returning from the Count's estate, Klopp felt like crap throughout the afternoon. He kept getting irritated and felt something weighing heavily on him, making it hard to concentrate. He made several unusual grammatical errors and absent-mindedly tapped the neen of the pen on the paper until the ink spread, ruining several important documents. Only then did Klopp inform his secretary that he would be leaving the office early. Although it was quite far to walk to his house in the suburbs, he decided to take a stroll for a change of pace. When taking the carriage, he would follow the main road, passing through common residential and commercial areas along the river. However, on foot, he couldn't afford to take such a detour. He had to go through a dimly lit slum area through an alley between the shops. Anyone who learned that he frequented that path advised against it, furrowing their brows and advising him to take a carriage. But he didn't mind it. Having grown up in the quiet and secluded forested area of the rugged northern mountains, he often took long walks on any path when city life sometimes became too suffocating. The narrow back alley he entered now was just the right distance for walking. The problem was that occasionally some people would unnecessarily instigate fights, but on a day like today, he actually wished someone would start a dispute. Holding the sturdy cane that he often used when walking home, he soon vanished into the darkness of the descending alley. By the time he reached his home, he was physically fatigued, but at least some of his mental exhaustion had been alleviated. The moment he opened the door, he was greeted by his recently hired maid, Martha, who looked a little surprised. "You're back early." She received the coat, hat, and cane that Klopp handed over. "Did you encounter another rabid dog? Why is there blood on the cane?" "Yeah, you're right. We should report it to the town hall." "I've already reported it. I'll go to bed early today, so Martha, you can get some rest." "I don't need dinner either." Klopp said that to the worrying middle-aged Omega woman and went up to the second floor. At the top of the stairs, he pulled off his tie and removed his vest. Once in his room, he undid a few buttons on the neck of his shirt, kicked off his shoes, and then collapsed onto his bed. He had a rough idea of why he wasn't feeling well. Firstly, he was physically dissatisfied, and secondly, he felt guilty for not being able to give his lover his mental loyalty. He couldn't fathom why on earth that alpha guy was causing him so much distress. When they hadn't been meeting, and he had forgotten about him, everything was peaceful. But as soon as he intervened again, everything went into chaos. It's all unfulfilled desires. That perfume, it must be because the scent was similar to what playboys wear. His looks were similar to Raphael, yet he looked more mature than him, so I must be confusing them. It's all because their marriage is a bit late. Yeah. So let's stop overthinking it and just propose to Raphael. Klopp suddenly got up from the bed and rummaged through the jacket pocket that he threw to the other side, taking out a ring box. Lying back on the bed, he looked at the platinum and sapphire ring, eventually falling asleep without even undressing properly. In his dream, he held a very fragile Omega with blonde hair and blue eyes. He had a slightly swollen belly, as if pregnant. Every time the angry alpha's penis thrust against his inner walls, the Omega cried out in a thin, high-pitched voice, further encouraging the act. When he reached climax, thrusting fiercely from behind, he poured his seed into the already impregnated body, and that Omega collapsed, gasping for breath. For some reason, his own very angry self grabbed those skinny arms roughly, as if they would break with the slightest effort, and forced him to lie down properly. He probably thought the child was being crushed. As if watching that scene in third person, Klopp was curious about Omega's face, so he shifted his gaze in that direction. The Omega, with his body turned over, was severely bruised, making it difficult to recognize his face. The bruises covering his body, visible through the open clothes, were evidence of violence, not evidence of a passionate love. Between the tousled blonde hair, a pair of striking blue eyes looked at his direction. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 4 1. I should you are listening at novelfull.audio. You look very tired today. Aren't you overexerting yourself? I just had a restless night's sleep yesterday, that's all. Klopp replied nonchalantly to his lover's concern. It wasn't a lie. It's not a big deal to lose a night's sleep during this busy period. However, the sensitive Omega didn't seem to feel that way. Raphael continued to observe his complexion, so Klopp emphasized once again, I'm really okay. Then Raphael turned his gaze forward. Without saying a word, he lightly grasped the cuff of Klopp's sleeve with his hand. Finding the gesture adorable, Klopp smirked and pretended to look elsewhere, turning his wrist backward and firmly clasping Raphael's soft hand. If other people see us, his startled voice came from behind, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. That way. They headed towards a high-end restaurant across the street. It wasn't crowded with people, but there were still quite a few glances mixed with smiles directed at the passionate lovers walking hand in broad daylight. Times were slowly changing, but publicly holding hands in places like this was frowned upon by many adults, especially among the aristocracy. However, increasingly rebellious young people were delighted in displaying public affection. Today, Klopp was putting that into practice. Without even looking, he knew Raphael's face must be flushed. He was definitely feeling unsure about the prying eyes around them, but Klopp didn't let go of his hand. We're walking too fast. Let's slow down a bit. I have something to talk about once we get there. As they walked a little faster, Klopp tightened his grip on that warm hand. He wasn't just feeling excited or thrilled. Lately, he had been plagued by guilt for not being faithful to Raphael, and he didn't like that he let his mind wander when he had such a wonderful person by his side. After the nightmare he had last night, Klopp came to the conclusion that marrying Raphael quickly and satisfying his desires was the best path to take. The steps of the Alpha holding the hand of a beautiful Omega and rushing into a high-end restaurant were determined and resolute. They entered the restaurant, gave his name to the manager, and reached their reserved table. As requested, the table was slightly secluded, positioned in a corner. Adorned with partitions and indoor plants, it exuded a cozy atmosphere, separated from the surroundings. It was perfect for carrying out his plans. It's a quiet and beautiful place. The food is good too. Soon, the appetizers and wine were served. As they leisurely enjoyed their course, they asked about each other's well-being during the time they had been apart. Raphael, who couldn't handle alcohol well, had a flushed peach-colored face after a single glass of wine and continued to smile until his eyes. The adorableness of it all was alleviating Klopp's fatigue. The relaxed Omega also emitted a sweet scent. It seemed like he was nearing his heat. Unlike the cold but burning resistance of someone's rebellious wall, Raphael's slightly trembling, azure eyes appeared incredibly affectionate. Warm breath escaped through lips that had turned red from the matured fruit juice, stimulating the instincts of the alpha in him. Klopp wanted to taste those lips right away, but unfortunately, he didn't have the courage to publicly engage in a kiss. Not because his alpha instincts weren't enough, but because he didn't want to be scorned by Raphael's father. He could still hold himself back for now. Klopp crossed his legs and covered his thigh with a napkin. Then he gently touched Raphael's hand, resting on the table. The blonde Omega's eyes smiled once again. At this rate, he might die here. Klopp crossed his other leg and began diverting the topic. Has anything special happened lately? As you know, I've been practicing cooking. And recently, while ironing, I accidentally burned and ruined some clothes. I'm still having a bit of trouble with controlling its temperature. Raphael started speaking in a somewhat fussing manner, and Klopp listened to his story. Soon the main course arrived and they debated about its reputation and value for the price. Being with Raphael put his mind at ease. There wasn't much excitement as he was at ease, but after all, marriage was surely about stability. After taking a bite of the tender meat, rich with succulent juices, Raphael spoke. Did I talk too much about myself? How about you, Sir Klopp? It's always the same for me. I meet clients, dismantle their nonsensical delusions one by one, kick them in the butt, and guide them onto the right path. Plus, I have to deal with endless paperwork. That sounds very interesting. So, is that why you haven't been sleeping? No, that's completely unrelated to work. Honestly, he could only remember the dream right after waking up, so he didn't feel like bringing up a dream that he couldn't remember properly afterward. Even if he was going to be his future wife, there were things that didn't need to be disclosed, no matter how honest one had to be. Dreams will end as dreams, and he had no intention to let them interfere with reality. Honestly, he didn't even remember the dream he had earlier this morning. The only things he could recall were blonde hair, blue eyes, and the fact that the other person was an extremely stubborn Omega. It was probably Raphael. Compared to his appearance in the dream, Raphael seemed slightly less mature in reality, but he was still growing and would undoubtedly become a mature beauty within a year. It was proven enough with how his center had been causing him problems from earlier. Klopp casually smiled and sipped his wine. I want to know about Sir Klopp's daily life too. We'll have many things to discuss in the future, and while I diligently explain my work, Sir Klopp doesn't explain anything. It's not fair. It seemed like Raphael noticed Klopp's attempt to change the topic and made a disappointed murmuring sound, which was incredibly cute. Eventually, Klopp surrendered. It would be boring to you. If it's about Sir Klopp's work, anything would be interesting to me. If you insist. Looking into those sparkling, gem-like blue eyes, Klopp began to recount his experiences with his clients, dealing with nobles, and anything else he thought might be interesting. Raphael was enthralled. Nodding his head, occasionally looking surprised, and even applauding, Klopp started to share more and more. His latest headache, the Count, inevitably became the topic of conversation. With the Count's brilliant mind and boundless artistic and humanities knowledge, despite being completely clueless when it came to financial sense, he made foolish choices and crossed the line. Klopp complained that the Count was tormenting him to death. At this, Raphael widened his eyes in disbelief. The Count T-Wind did that, yeah, that Count. He really gives me a headache. There's not a single thing that goes smoothly. As his financial manager, I try to give him polite advice, but he doesn't listen and just arrogantly argues about every little thing. I can't believe it, I thought he was very polite and considerate. If he's polite and considerate, then I'm the epitome of etiquette. When Klopp grumbled irritably, Raphael laughed and said, "You sounded like a young child picking your friend's faults." Raphael chucked. "Let's stop talking about that annoying guy." Annoying guy. I've never seen anyone refer to the Count in such a way. You'll be hearing it often from now on. Klopp said it with a grimace, and Raphael responded with a bigger laugh. He seemed to think that it was a joke. If Klopp took that seriously, it would have made him look narrow-minded, and he didn't want that. Well, if he's such an annoying person, there's nothing I can do. I received an invitation from the Count, so I'll either go alone or go with my younger sibling. An invitation. Could it be a soirée? Oh, I suppose you know about it. Yes, he's having a concert in the Rose Garden this time. I heard that a maestro I admire is coming, so I really want to go. I was originally planning to ask Sir Klopp to go with me, but, even without hearing where he cut off, Klopp could tell. But that wasn't the issue. Klopp was curious about how Raphael received an invitation from the Count. After Klopp went to warn Aylock, the guest list had been cut in half. In response to Klopp's question, Raphael gave an unexpected answer. "I'm his relative. You could say we're distant cousins. We're not that close, so we didn't interact much, but recently the Count has been sending me invitations regularly." A relative? Klopp asked in disbelief, and the blonde Omega nodded with a selfless smile. "Yes, don't you think I resemble the Count? Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment." Volume 2 Chapter 4.2. I should you are listening at novelfull.audio. Klopp couldn't believe it. No, he didn't want to believe it. Sometimes they might look similar, but he thought it was only natural since they have the same hair color and eye color. In fact, no matter how you looked at Raphael, he seemed like an Omega, while the Count didn't look like an Omega at all. Aylock wasn't overflowing with alpha traits, but he could never confuse him as not being an alpha. It was only after hearing those words that he mentally pictured that irritating face and carefully examined Raphael, finding some resemblance. But Aylock T-Wind and Raphael Westport were completely different people. Putting aside the difference between Alpha and Omega, there was nothing alike in their way of speaking, attitude, and even their scent. Klopp twisted his lips in a grimace and rested his back against the backrest. "You don't look alike at all. Sir Klopp, you're really strange today. Many people think that the Count and I look very similar. In fact, there have been many cases where people who don't know us well confuse and mistake us. They either call me the Count or follow me, thinking that the Count is an Omega. People must be blind. You are completely different in my eyes. Even if you bring hundreds of similar people, I can tell them apart." Upon hearing that, Raphael blinked his eyes, then smiled shyly and took a sip of water. Klopp looked at him, still leaning back against the backrest, his posture a little off. "Right. I can distinguish them no matter where they are. Raphael and Aylock are truly worlds apart. And who the hell was that asshole who mistakenly thought the Count was an Omega? Was it that guy from before? It seems like he's been flirting with Aylock for more than just a day or two. Does he think he's doing good when the other person is making a serious face? How ridiculous." Klopp suddenly felt thirsty and quickly downed the remaining wine. "Earlier, you said you had something to say." Raphael, who had been glancing at this side intently with his head raised, cautiously spoke, a little nervously. Klopp, who was just setting down the empty wine glass, instantly regained his senses. "I had a plan for today. That unhelpful Count, huh? Whether he's present or not, he always interferes. He rummaged inside his jacket and took out what he had carefully kept since leaving the office. It was an invitation made of high-quality handmade white paper. As Raphael, who had been gazing at the fingertips of the other person with sparkling eyes, seemed somewhat disappointed, he let out an "ah" and muttered in admiration. Klopp quickly straightened his posture and handed the invitation to Raphael. "Actually, I also received this invitation. I was planning to ask you to go together, but since you also received it, it takes away some of the excitement." "Ah, no. The evening soirée at the Rose Garden is a very romantic event. Since I wanted us to go together, it's nice that our hearts connected." "I'm glad." The voice of Raphael saying that was a little weak. His smile wasn't as bright as he expected. Klopp knew well that he had expected something else. A platinum ring adorned with a magnificent sapphire, or an alpha to his knees holding the ring out to him. However, Klopp had a different idea. He wasn't in a desperate enough situation to stage such a fancy scenario in this complicated restaurant. A once-in-a-lifetime proposal needed to be romantic. Although it was a Count's event, he had played a significant role in it, so he had enough qualifications to use it privately. "I may not know much about aristocratic events, but I heard that the soirée held in Taiwan's Rose Garden has a special meaning." "Ah." With that, Raphael's gloomy face turned into one filled with surprise and anticipation. Seeing the completely different expression from a moment ago, Klopp couldn't help but chuckle. "Do you know about it?" Traditionally, it was the center of social gatherings, so it has many legends. One tradition that has been revived through the efforts of a previous countess is the evening soirée. There is a fairy tale-like story that the love sworn in the mansion's rose garden on the night of the full moon lasts forever. So, many people, especially on that day, Raphael's ears were already completely red as he spoke. Klopp had to force himself to hold back his laughter. If he laughed now, Raphael's face would turn completely red, and he might even faint. "The soirée is happening this full moon. Would you like to go together with me?" "Yes." Raphael nodded with a soft, crawling voice in response. He looked incredibly cute and lovely. Considering the expenses demanded by the Count, the concert that day would be incredibly luxurious and undoubtedly memorable. It would also be the perfect day to propose to his future wife who he would spend the rest of his life with. The meal at the restaurant went smoothly. They finished a bottle of wine before dessert arrived. While Klopp mostly drank it, Raphael also drank more than usual. Today, Raphael seemed exceptionally happy, which made Klopp happy as well, so they both drank a little too much. So when they left the evening restaurant, instead of immediately taking a carriage, they decided to walk to sober up. It was actually time to send Raphael home, but if he sent Raphael home at this moment, his potential father-in-law would grab him by the neck and label him as a heinous criminal who touched an omega before marriage. Klopp didn't want that to happen. Some might wonder what was the connection between overdrinking and speeding, but those who have met Viscount Westport, who played a significant role in shaping Raphael's pure and delicate nature, wouldn't think so. He thought that it was better to clear one's mind before an important event. After walking a bit and letting the smell of wine dissipate, Klopp planned to send Raphael off in the racing carriage he favored. The experienced coachman would deliver Raphael to Westport Estate precisely at the time given by Klopp. "It's the first time I've walked around so late at night. My father is very strict, so, I know very well. You'll fall if you walk backwards like that." Worried, Klopp reached out his hand, and Raphael, feeling extremely embarrassed, held on to it. He wasn't reaching out to hold him, but rather gesturing for him to keep walking, but it didn't matter. Klopp firmly held his hand and walked. Raphael leaned his head on Klopp's arm, feeling a little dizzy. It seemed like he had drunk too much. The streets were quite crowded with people taking late-night walks. There were couples like Klopp and Raphael, as well as couples with children. There were a few alphas who seemed to be friends and a few omegas with their chaperones. Klopp enjoyed the tranquil atmosphere as they walked. Yes, this was what a stable life felt like. It was then. Raphael, who was half hanging on Klopp with his head tilted, suddenly straightened his body and pointed in a certain direction. Isn't that person over there Count T. Wind? What? Why did that name come up again all of a sudden? Klopp looked puzzled and gazed in the direction Raphael pointed. The person wearing dark-colored clothes, unlike his usual light suits, and with a hooded cloak, was walking quickly toward somewhere alone. He kept turning his head around and covered the edge of the hood slightly, as if trying to hide himself. As Raphael had mentioned, he had a physique that seemed like Alok. But there was no reason for the distinguished Count to enter a dirty, dark alley at this late hour, unaccompanied and dressed in such a suspicious manner. Moreover, Alok always carried himself with confidence, holding his head high, and not walking around in a crouched and guarded manner like someone who had committed a crime. Where could he be going? I don't know. Was he really the Count? He's not the sort of man to be wandering about alone at this late hour, without a carriage or servants. You're right. Maybe I was mistaken. Yeah. That road leads to a very bad place, and there's no reason for the Count to go there. The place Klopp mentioned was a path leading to the notorious slums in the capital, commonly known as the bottom place. Klopp was familiar with it as he sometimes used it as a shortcut on his way home, and he had dealt with a few rabid dogs there. Hearing his words, Raphael tilted his head in confusion. I suppose so. The Count would usually be playing a musical instrument or reading at this time, if he doesn't have a partner. That's true. Or maybe he's thinking of ways to spend his money. Klopp nodded lightly in agreement. I wasn't feeling well that day, so I went to bed early. Why? No, I was just curious. I didn't know I had to tell you every detail of my private life. Or are you also suggesting some sort of limit when it comes to sleep? When he visited to discuss the arrangements for the soirée expenses a few days later, Alok responded very irritably to his casual question. Klopp was offended that Alok responded annoyedly over the casual question, so he didn't say anything more. That day, Alok's strong perfume scent gave him a headache, so Klopp only said the bare minimum and left. Alok didn't even bid him a formal farewell. Thank you to everyone for the unconditional support in the comments in every chapter. We're now halfway through Volume 2. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 5.1 The Fate Flows Again. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. On the evening of the full moon, Klopp was forced to wear the black full attire he rarely wore at Martha's nagging. Do I really need to dress up like this? What are you saying? If you don't wear these nice clothes on a day like today, when will you wear them? Turn around. Klopp turned around, and Martha inspected the vest for wrinkles, grabbed the hem and pulled it down. Then she brought a suit that was in perfect condition, not a single wrinkle to be found. After buttoning all the cuffs, Martha adjusted the suit's shoulder pads with a brush she had brought with her. Keep your hair neat, and let's see. Your shirt's too tucked in. Roll up your sleeves. While redoing the cuffs, Martha slightly pulled the shirt sleeves and let them peek out of the black suit sleeves. Finally, she meticulously adjusted the tie to ensure it wasn't crooked, then put her hands on her hips and looked at her work with great satisfaction. And the shoes are shiny. It's brilliant. The Omegas will be dazzled. I don't need to impress everyone, just that one person's eyes are enough. Did you remember to bring the ring? Klopp smiled at Martha while looking at his reflection in the full-length mirror. He heard the sound of a carriage arriving. As he descended the stairs, Martha extended the same level of care to the perfectly maintained hat and cane. I hope you'll be accepted. It's boring for me to be alone at home. Don't worry, next year I'll make sure you're too busy babysitting to be bored. Klopp smiled broadly and bid farewell to Martha before boarding the carriage. Martha stood at the entrance and waved his hand. Don't even think about coming home if you fail. I won't open the door. That will never happen. The carriage, carrying a young alpha who felt slightly nervous before an important event, raced toward its destination. The road, which was usually annoyingly close, seemed unusually long today. Looking at the grand mansion in the distance, Klopp took out a small box from his jacket pocket. The ring sparkled more than usual. Normally, he was supposed to go to Westport Estate to pick up Raphael. However, he couldn't do that today. Last time, he had arrived a bit late and caused a commotion, so the Westport Estate arranged a carriage to bring their precious Omega son to the Count's estate. Klopp was slightly disappointed because he wanted to meet Raphael quickly, but at the same time, he was more excited. He laughed to himself while imagining how cute and lovely Raphael would look. The driveway of the estate was crowded with carriages of other guests who had already arrived. Waiting for his turn, a footman approached and opened his carriage door. Neatly buttoning his jacket to keep it from wrinkling, Klopp got off the carriage and walked straight into the entrance. The grey-haired butler, dressed more formally than usual, with impeccable posture, was politely greeting the distinguished guests arriving one after another. "Good evening, Marquis Wolflake." Hugo. "How have you been?" "Thanks to you, I've been well." "You, lead Marquis Wolflake to his seat." The tall, black-haired alpha followed the footman's guidance and headed inside. The butler who received him showed no signs of unease. As Klopp followed behind, he extended an invitation. At first, the butler nodded politely, but when he saw the recipient's name written on the invitation's cover, he narrowed his eyebrows and raised his head. Then, his eyes, which had always appeared cold and indifferent, widened. "Klopp. Sir Bandyke, why? Is there something on my face?" The butler looked at Klopp as if he couldn't believe his eyes, quickly scanning him up and down. Klopp knows very well how much the butler resents his nagging and angry behavior toward Aylock. They had always maintained a certain distance between them, and there had been no explicit display of his feelings, but his behavior now was so inappropriate that Klopp didn't feel good about it. "How rude. I apologize. I was just quite surprised compared to how you usually are. Because I'm a country bumpkin who only cares about money, yet I am dressed extravagantly, which makes me unbefitting of the Count's prestigious soirée." Tilting his head, Klopp glanced downward and looked at the footman. When the corners of his mouth slightly lifted, the butler seemed slightly taken aback and shook his head. Quickly composing himself, the butler smiled his usual cold smile. "No, not at all. Today, you are a splendid guest who adds glory to the soirée. I was honestly amazed. I didn't expect to see you in such fine form. I suppose I have to pay the price for losing today's wager. You, lead Lord Bandyke to the table." "A wager?" Although Klopp asked repeatedly, the butler pretended not to hear and called for the footman who had been waiting, guiding Klopp to the rose garden where the soirée was taking place. Before following the footman, Klopp looked intently at the butler and he replied, "It's a private conversation between me and my master," as he approached the entrance. Since the butler was already receiving other guests, Klopp couldn't pry any further and followed the footman. To think they're now also betting on people. I must definitely ask and find out later. The moment he entered the rose garden with a frowned expression, his spiteful resolve vanished. In the center of the magnificent rose garden, where hundreds of lanterns seemed like sprinkling stars, there stood a grand stage where musicians would perform. Tables for dozens of guests were arranged in a stable arrangement, with almost as many footmen and maids moving between them as there were guests. But that wasn't what left Klopp speechless. On the silk sheets covering the tables, scented candles exuding a faint fragrance were sparkling on silver candlesticks. Next to them, there laid rare flowers that were obviously not grown in the garden, blooming and flourishing. The chairs, covered with silk covers that matched the table, had small flower wreaths hanging on them. Even the large number of roses hung with white silk ribbons around the surrounding flower beds and the colorful roses scattered on the floor. What on earth was all this? How much did this cost? You damned Count. He wanted to immediately find Alok and question how much he had exceeded his limits. But he couldn't find him. When he asked the servants, they had no idea of his whereabouts. We also don't know where the Count is at the moment. Until just now, he was talking to the conductor in the music hall, but he's not there now, were the only responses he received. He wanted to go to the butler and demanded the Count's presence right away, but it would likely cause a big commotion since he was receiving important guests, so he suppressed the urge. He'd still show up eventually. Klopp tapped his fingers on the table and gritted his teeth. He was sitting in one of the best seats right in the front and center. It made sense since he had worked hard to quickly restore the Count's reputation, which had been wobbling in the hands of his dumb son. But deep down, he was surprised. This shouldn't be necessary. Looking at the other tables in the same row, everyone was a marquis, count, viscount, and so on. It felt as if it was a royal New Year's party or some kind of grand ceremony. Among them, Klopp was the only one without a title. While he didn't feel intimidated, it wasn't comfortable either. He couldn't understand why he was given such a seat. Just as he was beginning to suspect that Alok was playing him for a wager, Raphael appeared from the other side of the room. Klopp's mouth dropped open as soon as he saw him, and he jumped to his feet. Dressed in a light blue suit, he was stunningly beautiful and lovely, drawing the attention of everyone around him. Feeling slightly uncomfortable with the attention, Raphael nervously looked around with a tense gaze and noticed his lover standing up from his seat. A smile bloomed on Raphael's fair face as he saw him. He's the eldest son of Westport, isn't he? His wife is such a beauty, and their son is equally remarkable. Do you know who that man is? They're soon to be engaged. Although he comes from a poor family, he is talented and highly anticipated as an alpha heir. It seems that Westport, who doesn't have an alpha successor, plans to make him their son-in-law. Oh, they make such a well-matched and cute couple. The words were spoken so loudly, but they were barely audible to Klopp. He walked over to Raphael and took his hand, kissing the back of it lightly, then his cheek. In the meantime, as Klopp returned to his seat, he felt a chilling gaze on the back of his neck. Instinctively, he glanced aside with a mix of anger and vigilance, and there he saw Marquis Wolflake, the man he had seen earlier, staring at them with eyes that shone ominously like a wolf. It felt as if he was challenging Klopp, and despite the impoliteness, Klopp didn't avert his gaze but stared back intently. Then, Wolflake turned his gaze away first. What a strange man. I'll be updating 2 parts at a time for Chapter 5. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 5.2. The Fate Flows Again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That thought didn't last long. Raphael, who was sitting next to him, said, I'm very nervous today, so I ended up a little late. Do I look strange today? People are staring at me, he went on and on, saying incredibly cute things, and Klopp got completely absorbed in them. Did you have any trouble on your way here? I came in my own carriage, and it was fine. But wow, a table right in the center like this. Sir Klopp, what have you done? Raphael's voice was full of laughter as he spoke. Klopp shrugged exaggeratedly and said, maybe he has finally realized all the effort I've put in so far, but in truth, he had one lingering question. For one thing, there were only 2 people at this table, whereas the other tables in the row usually had 3 or 4 seats. There were no extra chairs. It seemed as if it had been planned that way from the beginning, just for the 2 of them. It was a bit odd. Although he could just be seated anywhere, it was strange to deliberately have the 2 of them sit together amongst the guest list. It was as if he knew what Klopp was going to do today. There's no way he did. Of course, it wasn't that he disliked this. It just caught him off guard. But that feeling didn't last long either. The attendant started serving various fruits, pastries, and champagne that complemented the soiree. Klopp quickly received his champagne as well, as he was seated at the best table. As the young footman in a suit and a white napkin under one arm held a bottle in front of him to check the label before opening it, Klopp was stunned. Unable to believe his eyes, Klopp rubbed them with his fingers and then looked again. It wasn't a mistake. Behind the young footman standing by the table, following the butler's instructions, several attendants were walking with bottles bearing the same label, distributing them to each table. Soon, a cheerful sound of popping corks filled the air. "Sir Klopp." Raphael, seeing Klopp frozen in his tracks, softly called his name, and only then did Klopp regain his senses and nodded to the footman. The footman skillfully uncorked the bottle and poured the sparkling yellow liquid, which bubbled like crystal, into the sparkling crystal glass before disappearing. Raphael sniffed the aroma of the champagne and said, "It smells wonderful." "Of course it is, it's a special order, only used for national events, like an inauguration ceremony." "Is it rare?" "Yes, let's drink it. We won't see this again." Klopp smiled. He clinked his glass against Raphael's bewildered one and took a sip. It had an incredibly rich aroma and taste, to the point where it made his head dizzy. "Yes, this is the taste of gold. And Count, you're dead today. I shall generously sprinkle this divine beverage over your grave." The conductor appeared and greeted the audience as the host of the soirée failed to show up. Soon, the music began to play, captivating the people with its beautiful harmony that rose higher into the sky. In such an atmosphere, the usual chatter that would normally persist at such gatherings was hardly audible. Klopp and Raphael, sitting close together at their small table, were also immersed in the music. Raphael, who had been learning the piano separately, had a great fondness for music and had even gone to see a few music performances with Klopp before. "The repertoire today is very romantic. It's amazing to hear Full Moon under the full moon itself. Do you know that the composer wrote it for his beloved lover?" "Is that so?" In truth, all Klopp could hear were sentimental melodies. Considering the vocal tone and flawless performance, he believed it was only natural given the musician's worth. However, he knew better than to show such thoughts. Raphael, who possessed a sensitive and rich sensibility, took the opportunity to hold Klopp's hand resting on the armrest and leaned his head slightly on his shoulder. The weight felt pleasant, causing Klopp to almost kiss Raphael's forehead, covered with golden silky hair. However, he suddenly tensed up as he felt a gaze from Wolflake, who was glaring in their direction again. What's with him? Is he looking for a fight? This time, Klopp returned the gaze with a determined look. Wolflake casually tilted his half-empty champagne glass before placing it on the table, twisting his thin lips. It was clear that he was showing hostility. I would rather avoid a fight today if possible. There's just no one helping me today, from the Count to the Marquis. What have I done to deserve such unjustified persecution and enmity? What's left now, Viscount, Baron, Duke? I already have Viscount Derbyshire or Westport against me. If he just met a Baron and a Duke, I would have collected all 5 enemies. This was absurd. Ha ha ha. Let's ignore it. Ignore it. Today is an important day. It's not a good time for bloodshed. Klopp forcibly directed his gaze forward and firmly gripped Raphael's soft hand with his own. Raphael came even closer and leaned in. At that moment, it felt as if a real knife was jabbed into the back of his head. This is not going to work. I have to give that greasy face a good punch so. It was then. The performance that had just reached its climax ended with a lingering note. The audience started applauding. Klopp also joined in the applause and looked to his side, where Marquis Wolflake, as if he hadn't done anything, clapped his hands while facing forward. Klopp, who had been growing increasingly irritated, glared at the Marquis, but suddenly he noticed that the applause grew louder. Without thinking, he also started clapping vigorously and turned his head to the front. And then, he was frozen in temporary shock. As the conductor introduced, a soloist stepped onto the stage. He was dressed in a suit much finer than those worn by the musicians and holding a gleaming violin in his hands. The guy was always well groomed, but on this particular day, he had brushed back his unusually shiny blonde hair, revealing a white, clean shaven face that seemed to reflect his personality. Under the flickering lights, his slightly reddened lips were firmly closed as he positioned the violin on his shoulder and exchanged signals with the conductor. They say Count T. Wind has an exceptional talent for music, and now we get to hear it firsthand. I really can't wait. Glancing at Raphael, who gave a small clap of excitement, Klopp looked forward again. In the few days they hadn't seen each other, Alok seemed a bit thinner, standing under the spotlight with a slightly melancholic expression. As he gripped the violin string and brought the bow closer, a shadow formed beneath his long and thick eyelashes. Through it, his vibrant blue eyes shone like jewels. His performance began right away. Klopp didn't know the title of the piece, but he knew the famous melody well, and it was widely known that it was composed for lovers. As the beautiful violin and the symphony orchestra started their harmony, sighs could be heard from various directions. Even Raphael's hand trembled in his hand, and Klopp also felt as if he was drawn into the music. But what captivated him wasn't just the heart-stirring music. The Count's blue eyes, which sometimes blazed with arrogance, sometimes with coldness, sometimes with anger, were a little wet that day. It wasn't the violin's melody that brought it out, it was there from the beginning. Opening his eyes a little, closing them again, the Count strummed his violin with very controlled movements. Occasionally, their eyes would meet and Alok would make a slight smile. A gentle breeze ruffled the hem of his jacket a little. And his neatly combed hair too. Leaning his head on the violin as if seeking solace from a lover, Alok expressed desperation infused with beauty in the form of a beautiful love song. "It's so beautiful and yet so sad," Raphael said, dabbing at the corners of his eyes with his handkerchief. Klopp nodded silently. He couldn't speak at that moment. And he couldn't take his eyes off Alok either. The Count looked incredibly holy and beautiful. Standing there so confidently, it felt like he could vanish like foam in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a profound sense of pathos. Until the performance ended, Klopp had to press his chest with his hand, battling indescribable grief and anguish. It was the best he could do. Following that, 2 more pieces were performed consecutively. Standing amidst the shimmering golden lights, surrounded by the melodies, Alok seemed like the embodiment of the angel of music, Israfel. It was an emotional melody in minor, and nothing could have been more fitting at that moment. The music, the ambience, and Alok's enchanting presence brought tears to the eyes of the Omegas around. Klopp, who was suddenly brought back to his senses by a sniffle, gave a small cough and looked around. As the final piece concluded, enthusiastic applause erupted. Some people even stood up from their seats, including Raphael. He immediately rose to his feet, clapping until his palms turned red. And tears were still lingering in his eyes, he occasionally wiped them with the back of his hand. Alok, who had just finished his performance, shook hands with the conductor. Then both of them gracefully bowed to the cheering audience. The applause grew louder. Amidst the unending applause, Alok smiled brightly. He barely managed to step down from the stage after bowing several times. As he descended, the enthusiastic crowd settled back into their seats and resumed the conversations that had been interrupted during the concert. Raphael, who had applauded enough times now, shyly lowered his still slightly wet eyes. The performance was undeniably beautiful, but it left something heavy in his heart, making his throat dry. He took a sip of the champagne from his half-filled glass. Looking beside him, Raphael's nose seemed slightly reddened at some point. Tear stains were clearly visible on his napkin. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment. Volume 2 Chapter 5.3 The Fate Flows Again. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Do you think that the Count had a heartbreak or something? Klopp almost blurted out the champagne he was drinking. What do you mean? Otherwise, how could he play such a performance? No way. There's no way the Count would experience something like that. He's so arrogant that I don't think he could love someone enough to feel that way. At that, Raphael's eyes narrowed at Klopp, as if he had been opposed to. Everyone is capable of love. I'm sure the Count has someone he loves. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to play such a melody. I know you're not into music, Sir Klopp, but still, you shouldn't talk about someone like that. Is that so? He was surprised to see Raphael, who always obediently listened to others, was expressing anger and defending someone. In astonishment, he easily agreed to him. As he did so, Raphael, who had been lecturing while wagging his finger, suddenly felt embarrassed and lowered his finger, saying, "I got a bit carried away," and apologized. "No need to apologize. It was true that I was in the wrong." "If you say that again," the blonde Omega raised his head and was about to say something while looking at Klopp, but he immediately shut his mouth. Following his gaze, Klopp turned his head and understood the reason. The sorrowful expression that had captivated people's attention just a moment ago had disappeared, replaced by the usual artificial smile as Aylock approached them. "Hello, Raphael." "Hello, Count." Klopp thought Aylock would at least look his way, but he only greeted Raphael. Raphael was at a loss for words and clasped his hands together, like an overjoyed girl meeting her idol. "How was my performance? Did you like it?" "It was incredibly beautiful. It felt like a heavenly melody." "You're flattering me. I'm not that skilled." "Oh no, even though I don't have much experience, your performance was truly moving. Thank you for inviting me here today." Raphael showered him with praise. It was genuine admiration, not flattery, but as Klopp listened, finding him cute, somewhat amusing, and a little embarrassing, he let out a fake cough. Then Aylock, as if he hadn't noticed Klopp's presence until now, looked at him with a slightly surprised expression, like he was seeing him for the first time. His fair face was adorned with a deeper smile than before. "And how did you feel hearing my play? Do you agree with your lover's words?" "I may not have a deep understanding of music to be qualified to judge, but even to my untrained ears, it was an excellent performance. It would be enough to sell yourself as a performer. At an expensive price that compensates for today's loss." Upon hearing those words, both Raphael and Aylock furrowed their brows and stared at Klopp intently. Looking at them up close, although they were clearly different in size and atmosphere, but they were both blonde and blue-eyed, which made it somewhat overwhelming. A penny-pincher who only cares about money. "I would normally take your side, but you went too far just now." He was at a loss for words. After a brief greeting, Aylock soon went to greet the other guests as the host of the concert. The people who had been waiting eagerly welcomed him with bright expressions. Watching him, Klopp pondered how he could sell him at an exorbitant price to compensate for the excess expenses. Perhaps it would be good to focus on theater orchestras notorious for severe exploitation and poor finances, which would teach him the importance of labor and the need to save money. He would understand more about expenses after he has eaten some soggy bread there. Meanwhile, Raphael grabbed his sleeve. There don't seem to be many people around. Now that he looked, there were quite a few empty seats scattered around the tables. The concert had just begun, so it was unlikely that they had already left. It was probably because it was an emotionally overwhelming concert, and Alpha Omega pairs, who had paired up early, had slipped away into the quiet darkness around them. Klopp had a hunch why Raphael said that. He slipped a hand around Raphael's waist and escorted him out of the crowded garden. "You two seem to hit off well." With a hint of laughter in Raphael's words, Klopp responded with a displeased expression, "At which part? You've been talking so comfortably with the Count. I've never seen anyone talk to him so casually. Don't you two have great conversations together too?" "That's not the case. Recently, I've been receiving frequent invitations, but the Count is a man of many secrets." Really?" Earlier, Aylock referred to Klopp as Raphael's lover. He acted as if he knew everything, even with the seating arrangement. Gossip among the aristocrats spread quickly, and there had been indirect mentions of their relationship, so it's possible that people knew about them. However, it was strange for Alok to be so considerate. Considering their usual bickerings, it would have been more normal for Alok to play a mischievous prank or make a snide remark. But today, Alok didn't say anything at all. The seating arrangement for only Klopp and Raphael, the terribly sad music, and the mournful expression on his face were all unexpected. Do you think that the Count had a heartbreak or something? Raphael's words from earlier suddenly came to mind. Then, Klopp looked down at the pretty Omega walking beside him. A chill ran down his spine. It can't be true, right, Alok? For some reason, he felt extremely anxious, to the point of being deeply restless. He had a strong sense that something troublesome would happen if he didn't propose to Raphael immediately. Feeling desperate, Klopp tried his best to find a suitable place. Near the estate house, where numerous servants were busy attending to dozens of guests, was not an ideal location. Moreover, Raphael wanted to be in the rose garden. There might have been a suitable spot in a dimly lit area where the lamplight didn't reach, but for some reason, every nook and cranny was occupied by people unnoticeably. Occasionally, even embarrassing sounds could be heard in the dark shadows due to the wind. Klopp quickly moved away, blocking Raphael's ears with both hands and avoiding those spots. Damn them all! Why are they causing a commotion and mating in someone else's house? There doesn't seem to be anyone over there. Klopp followed where Raphael pointed. And there, two shimmering silver eyes were gleaming in the darkness, lurking like a wolf in search of prey. This place is just like a wolf den. Let's go back. Klopp grabbed Raphael and led him away. After a while, when he was starting to get irritated, he finally found a small empty space. It had a dimly lit lamp that cast an indirect glow, and next to it, a beautiful arch of climbing roses adorned the area. It was a very lovely spot, with a faint scent of roses adding to its perfection. After setting Raphael, who looked like he belonged there, under the arch of roses, then, with a slightly trembling chest, Klopp let go of Raphael's hand that he had been holding, while brushing away the nervousness. Raphael Westport. Calling his full name in a soft and muffled voice, Klopp saw Raphael raise his hands together to his chest in a visibly tense manner, then he dropped them and answered shyly. Yes, Klopp Bandyke. His blonde hair shimmered in the full moon. Raphael couldn't even raise his head and kept his gaze slightly lowered, his fingertips trembling slightly, and the sight of them made Klopp's already pounding heart race even harder. Perhaps, the heart in that small chest was feeling the same way too. He should kneel down and propose immediately, but when it came down to it, it wasn't an easy task. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of self-doubt and inexplicable guilt engulfed him. He even felt terrified. He felt burdened by the responsibility of turning someone else's precious child into his own. But he couldn't back down here. He would only make himself look ridiculous and, above all, he would hurt Raphael. The shimmering blue eyes looking in this direction were not solely due to the faint lighting. Klopp smiled at the person looking at him and took out a box from his pocket. Upon seeing the velvet box, Raphael let out a small gasp of surprise. At the same time, Klopp took a deep breath and knelt down on one knee in front of the person he would spend his lifetime with. And then, when he opened the ring box, suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the corner, followed by two people hastily locking lips and stumbling toward them. They were completely absorbed in each other and paid no attention to this side. Klopp, who had just knelt down, couldn't avoid the oncoming individuals. The intruders ended up tripping over him in a grand fashion. Klopp found himself underneath the two of them. As a result, the ring box he was holding flew somewhere in the commotion. Make me feel happy and supported by leaving a comment.